What's up, everybody? It's time for another episode of First Fruits of Zion Reacts. And today we're looking at, I think it's a preview of a series. We're picking up in the middle of a conversation here. Jordan Peterson's in there. Looks like a Daily Wire thing. I think it's called The Gospels. We like the Gospels a lot here at First Fruits of Zion. I personally think we have the best commentary on the Gospels ever written, which is Chronicles of the Messiah, which you can get at FFOZ.org. However, today we're going to be reacting to whatever they have to say about it. And the title of the file name here for the video is Did the Jews End with Jesus? Which is ominous. It's an ominous title. Hopefully they come up with the right answer. But I guess we'll find out. So here we go. Let's dive in.
So a question for you, Douglas. When you spoke of Jesus as priest, prophet, king, and you used the word culmination. So my Jewish ears were sensitive to that word. What does culmination mean? Realization, promise, or end?
Yeah.
Well, end is a...
They're probably not going to get into this. I like prophet, priest, and king. Jesus is prophet, priest, and king. Those are all accurate. I think the thing that when I hear that now that I'm neck deep in Messianic Judaism, when I hear that now, I think, oh, don't forget rabbi, don't forget teacher. Like, I think we can miss a major significance of Jesus' life and ministry and death and resurrection if we miss that, because he can turn out to just have this theological significance. But we're not looking at his teachings. We're not very good followers if we don't also consider him as our teacher and as someone like who we have to do all the things that he said. So, but just what came to mind. Yeah, culmination. You know, culmination can mean different things. Culmination can imply different things. Let's see what they have to say, but I want to hear the answer.
Well, end is a problem for a Jew. Obviously, because the Jewish mission or chosenness or reality continues.
Just for not even a generation, the sacrifice system ends.
The sacrificial system ended with the destruction of the temple.
Yeah.
That's the dichotomy between like Jewish and Christian assessments of the theological significance of the end of the Levitical sacrificial system. On the Christian side, you have it. Well, it's like, oh, Jesus came to end it, and God allowed the temple to be destroyed as proof that he didn't want the Levitical system anymore. So he allowed the Romans to come in and destroy it. Whereas from a Jewish perspective, it's like, well, no, there's nothing. The temple was destroyed before that by the Babylonians. It didn't mean the end of the sacrificial system. It was a component of God's judgment against Israel for not keeping the Sinai covenant. It doesn't reflect the end of the significance of the temple or the Levites or the priests. In fact, when you read about these things being established in Exodus, it does say that they're going to just keep going until when Jesus uses the language. Not one jot or tittle shall pass away until the world passes away, which will happen at some point. This world will pass away, and the Levitical system at that time. You know, we read in Revelation that you don't need a temple in this future time, the world to come. But we're not living in that time now. So yeah, you can see the two different perspectives there on what it means that the temple was destroyed, whether that means the end of the significance of Israel and the Levitical system and the sacrifices.
Jesus is talking about, he says, at the end of the text, he says, Jerusalem will be destroyed.
If I could, I think what I was trying to get at is that there's a tension here.
What an accent.
In that the figure of the Anointed One here, the Jesus figure, is profoundly Hebraic. And yet he's at odds with the normative rabbinic Judaism of his time. That was really my main point.
Yeah, I agree. I just want...
Yeah, that's a lot of people agree on that. it's important to realize, I think we've gone over this before, that when Jesus, like why does Jesus argue with the Pharisees all the time? Why does he not have a problem with anyone else? Like that's the group that he's sort of butting heads with. And again, when a good example is like the one time that he argues with a Sadducee. The Sadducees come and they ask him this stupid question about a woman who gets married like 7 times, and they're like, well, in this resurrection that you foolishly believe in, who is she going to be married to? Clearly, our dumb example here, or our extreme absurd example, has disproven the idea of the resurrection as being absurd. And Jesus doesn't enter this protracted argument with them. He doesn't bring lots of evidence. He says, ye do err. I mean, the King James, ye do err, not knowing the scriptures or the power of God. He doesn't tell the Pharisees that. He doesn't say, you just don't know anything. You guys are idiots. He argues with the Pharisees over minutia, and he criticizes them for their hypocrisy. But he like in Matthew, he tells his disciples, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So whatever they tell you, that's what you need to do. Like they were in a position of legitimate authority, and Jesus had issues with some of their interpretations, some of their applications of Jewish law, and he had issues with the fact that a lot of them were outwardly very pious and observant, but on the inside there were real problems, and so he was calling them to repentance. But it's a mistake to read those arguments with the Pharisees as indicating that there's this vast gulf between Jesus and the Pharisees. They argued a lot, in part because of how close they were. What you have, and this, I think, the gospel authors, particularly Matthew, he is writing from a perspective later on in the first century where his movement of Jewish Jesus followers is fighting for the same social space and social identity as early rabbinic Judaism or Pharisaic Judaism. They're both claiming to have the correct expression of Judaism and the correct, to be in the correct group. And they're very, very close together. And because of that, you have a lot of the conflict that between Jesus and the Pharisees is recorded and brought out in Matthew in more detail, because Matthew's goal is to educate his audience that, our halakha looks a little different. Our way of practicing Judaism looks a little different than the Pharisees, but it's very important that we all realize that we're correct, that we're following the rabbi with the correct interpretation of Jewish law and application of Jewish law. There is a vast gulf between Jesus and the Sadducees. There's a pretty vast gulf between Jesus and the Zealots, because they want revolution before and without repentance. Jesus says repentance comes first.
I'm not being argumentative. I want to know if you think, as a Christian, that it ended, because this is a very big issue in Jewish Christian history. Christian vis-a-vis Jewish history. Do the Jews end with Jesus?
I don't think so.
No.
I think it's very mysterious, but for sure.
I just want to say it's so good that he didn't say yes. He said, I don't think so. I like that. I like that a lot better than some of the other people we've been reacting to. That gives me a little hope.
Sure, they do see that Christ is bringing the end of that system. But the weird thing is that, we talk about how when Christians come into the world, we talk about how all the rituals go away. It's like all these Greek rituals, everything goes. Zeus, nobody worships Zeus anymore. Nobody worships
pagan
all these
rituals.
Gods. The only people that are preserved in the Christian world at ancient time are the Jews.
And in fact, the Jews remain. I mean, in Western Christianity, the Jews are the only significant minority.
So there's a mystery about how
He must mean like a theologically significant.
Christians and Jews interact, I believe, but sometimes it comes out very, very horribly. But in the best times is a mystery about eschatological something, right? How is this all going to come together in the end? We don't know, but there's a sense in which There's a reason for the Jews to continue on our path with us. We don't know exactly how.
And the hope of conversion.
Well, before we get to the conversion issue, I kind of like what this guy is saying. He's not speaking from a position of from our position, because for us it's not as mysterious. This is what happens. I'll explain to you what's happening. This guy's answer is what happens when you start from the basic Christian assumption that the church is the people of God, and that's the only people of God. And if you want to define what is the people of God or who are the people of God, your ecclesiology as well, it's the church. It's the followers of Jesus. And maybe if you're a Catholic, it's the visible church, and if you're a Protestant, it's the invisible church. There's different ecclesiologies, but they all start with the premise that the followers of Jesus are the people of God. There's not really room for another people to be the people of God. But this guy has probably read his Bible, and if you read the Bible from that standpoint, from that assumption, that ecclesiological assumption, and you just verse after verse, chapter after chapter, book after book of the Bible that just affirms over and over and over again, well, it's Israel. Israel is the people of God. And you come away from that experience, you read the Bible cover to cover, and you're like, well, the church is the people of God, but something's going on with Israel. Like, there's, in some mysterious way, they still matter. And so it's commendable that he's realized that. So at First Fruits of Zion, we start from the biblical premise that Israel is the people of God. And when we get to the New Testament, Paul talks about, like, well, there's this mystery that was not revealed to previous generations, and it's God's plan for everyone else. All the Gentiles can also be part of the kingdom of the Jewish Messiah. They can be brought in, and they can be saved from the wrath to come, and they can be part of God's people. And this Gentile following of Yeshua, that's the mysterious thing. That's the thing that wasn't clearly prophesied. It was hinted, of course, all through the Old Testament, but it was not clearly delineated by the Old Testament prophets or in the Torah. And Paul says, look, now it's been revealed. And these days it's been revealed through him. That was his gospel, Gentile inclusion in the body of Messiah. So I think that's an interesting contrast. This guy has not made the shift that we have to the starting point is that Israel is the people of God, and the Gentile inclusion is mysterious. So for him, the church being the people of God is super obvious, but he gets it that Israel does matter. So that's commendable, and I hope that he will continue to immerse himself in the Word of God, and perhaps he will eventually come to the realization that Israel is the people of God. That would be great. Maybe he'll watch this video. Hello. Okay, I hope they don't talk too much about conversion. That's a difficult. It's hard to watch people talk about that.
Of course. I mean, I once went to
I respect that fact, and I'm not offended by it. I'm offended if that, and that's not. I don't like the word. I'm never offended personally, but
wow.
I mean, to really speak of the most
elevated spiritual stature,
one of
never
the most
offended.
difficult subjects
Laudable.
is the church, not necessarily the Catholic Church, just the church. Is the church the new Israel or a second Israel? In other words, have the Jews lost the title of Israel? That's the question I'm posing.
St. Paul has a very interesting take on this. He says, on the one hand, yes. He does say that. He says the branch has been cut off and this branch has been put in. And then he says, but don't boast of that, my friend, because who's to say if that could not change again?
He's talking about Romans 11, which is one of our favorite passages here on First Fruits of Zion Reacts. We come back to it over and over again when the question of the church replacing Israel comes up, because we're against replacement theology here. I think it's really interesting that he used branch, the singular word branch, as if to say the Jewish people, the branch was broken off, and the church, the branch was like grafted in. It's branches. It's branches. And what Paul does throughout Romans 9 to 11 is he does contrast sometimes, like Jewish people who are acting in accordance with and responding correctly to the revelation that God has given to the Jewish people. He contrasts them with Jewish people who don't, right? And so there's the generation that dies in the wilderness because they didn't do what God told them to do. But that it wasn't a rejection of Israel because there was a remnant, right? And Paul in Romans 11, he's thinking like, well, he's making the point in part. One of the points he's making is that the fact that there are many Jewish followers of Yeshua is evidence that God is not finished with Israel. God is not finished with the Jewish people. But some of the branches were broken off. Okay, so some Jewish people abandoned the Torah. Some Jewish people are not living the way that God has commanded them to live. And those branches, okay, like plural branches, some Jewish people, and then some people from the nations are grafted into the tree. And for Paul, this combination, Jew and Gentile, that's the assembly. It's the assembly of Yeshua. So that's because it's plural. It's more difficult when you use the plural term that's there in Romans 11. It's more difficult to interpret it as Israel being broken off and like a bunch of Gentiles as some singular monolithic unit being grafted in. It's a clue that he's slightly wrong here when he's thinking of it in that way. Israel being broken up, like Israel is the tree. Israel's the tree, and we're as a Gentile follower of Jesus. I'm grafted into the tree that is Israel, along with lots and lots of Jewish people and many other Gentiles. But we do have to be careful not to be arrogant, like he was saying. Paul is saying, don't be arrogant toward the branches that were broken off, because God can break you off if you can, whatever you think you have, you can lose it.
So I do believe that there's a deep sense in which Christians do think that they are the continuation of Israel.
It's an imaginative reinvisiting.
They do think that. It's not correct in the way that they think it. I mean, we're certainly have a continuity with Israel. There's a sense in which we're part of the same thing, but we're not Jewish. We don't become Israel. We don't replace Israel. We come alongside Israel, and we share in a spiritual inheritance through Messiah by being followers of the Jewish King.
I would say
they definitely have to be very meek and humble about it, and not, for example, take it out on the Jews.
May I just add a bit of the imagery here, which I think is significant in relation to this, and that's the image of Jerusalem as feminine. Jerusalem as the mother, and Jerusalem also as the bride. So the king imagery is this rather Jungian, but it's the king entering the city, the feminine, who is both the bride and the mother. And this imagery for the church as the bride is the imagery of the New Jerusalem. And of course, we have that image particularly beautifully in the book of Revelation. So
Joel Willits wrote a pretty neat article that you can find. I think it's it might be in the book Introduction to Messianic Judaism, for which he also served as an editor, if I remember correctly. But he wrote this neat article demonstrating pretty clearly that the bride in Revelation is still Israel. It's still the Jewish people. Who are we then? Like, if we're not the Jewish people, if we're not the bride, well, we're guests at the wedding. We're sitting at the wedding table, but we're not the bride. Well, maybe that's not correct. I don't know, but it's worth considering that the bride figure, the mother figure in Revelation, still Israel, still the Jewish people. So their status never went away. It was always Israel. The bride imagery, being married to God, is something that comes out of the Old Testament prophets. It comes out of Hosea. And why would that imagery, why would that status, why would that picture change? I think in Revelation it probably is still Israel.
I don't think there's an easy answer to your question, but it is certainly the case that the Christian imaginary is radically dependent on this.
It might also have something to do with
I don't think we need Jungian archetypes to interpret the Bible. I think it's probably safe to stick with traditional Jewish interpretation. Not that traditional Jewish interpretation is lacking in mystical imagery and male and female. It's certainly there. But it's hard enough to wrap your head around that without also trying to introduce some of these other ideas. Are there going to be correlations? Sure. Are there going to be similarities? Sure. But in my mind, it's just easier for me to stick with Judaism.
Unresolved issue of the relationship between, let's say, the individual and the nation. Christianity could be in some ways the triumph of the individual in relationship to God, with the notion that the Jews are called upon to be an exemplary nation still intact. If there's a space, so to speak, for the nation in the kingdom of heaven, that's a way of thinking about it. I mean, we have an idea that comes out of Exodus that the proper cosmic arrangement is subsidiary. So in principle, the nation could be an element of that subsidiary moral structure. Someone has to be the standard bearer for the ideal nation then.
There's also...
And so,
I'm not sure what a subsidiary moral structure is. I'm not familiar with this guy's teaching and work, and so maybe I don't have necessarily the framework to interpret what he's saying. It sounds similar to what we believe at First Fruits Design, which is that, of course, you have at the top of, if you give me like a pyramid shape, if you want to think of it that way, at the top of the pyramid is Jesus, and he's the king of Israel. So like the next layer down on the pyramid would be Israel, and then under that are the nations because the center of the Messianic kingdom, Jesus reigns from Jerusalem, and the center of the kingdom is Israel, and the nations come to Israel, like in Isaiah 2, and ascend the mountain, and they learn the wisdom of God's Torah. The Torah goes forth from Jerusalem, but we don't shape it as a pyramid. We have concentric circles, and we call it proleptic radial ecclesiology, where Jesus is at the center, and then around that is Israel, and then you have the nations around that. So it's concentric circles. It's harder to visualize with my hands than a pyramid shape. But yes, and Israel is supposed to be the exemplary nation. I mean, that's clear. They're the priestly nation. Deuteronomy makes this clear. It says all the other nations, if you're following the Torah, if you're keeping the Torah, if the Jewish people are keeping the Torah, their covenant fidelity with Hashem, with God, then all the other nations will look at them and say, what a wise and understanding people. Look how great their culture and society and laws are. And what other nation has a God that's so close to it as Israel's God is to them? So exemplary nation, sure. The triumph of the individual, I don't know what that means. It sounds like something an American would say, but I thought this guy was Canadian. I don't know. Certainly to follow Yeshua as a Gentile is an individual choice in a way that for a Jewish person who's circumcised when they're born, they're immediately part of a nation. They're part of a group that's defined and that you can point to and see. And for a Gentile, you have to make that choice. For a Gentile, it's a choice. The denominations that introduced infant baptism sort of realized the power of that idea that, on the 8th day of circumcision, you're already in, you're part of the thing. But like in the first century Messianic Judaism, in the first century body of believers, for a Gentile to come and join, it was something that he would come and do himself. Hopefully bring his family, but Paul addresses the possibility that maybe the family doesn't follow along. Maybe you end up married to someone who's not a follower of Jesus. So that did happen. But when you join the thing, you are part of the thing now. You're part of an assembly, you're part of a body. And it's not an individual like journey. Like it's something that you undertake with the rest of the people who are doing that. You're joining a group.
that's one of the ways it appears to me that a reconciliation of sorts is inevitable.
Go, Greg. It just struck me.
I hope reconciliation between Jews and Christians happens in my lifetime. I do believe it's inevitable. I wonder if that's what he was talking about.
When Douglas was talking about this notion of the feminine or of creation, and so it's very interesting just to use as a microcosm this unlikely exploration that started with you. It started with you with Genesis, right? If you want to put a foundation of a Judeo-Christian ethic back beneath Western civilization, that's one of your stated aims. You can't just start with the Gospels. The process of becoming needs to start with Genesis. And in some ways, this being a fulfillment of that text adds all this richness. And so it's dependent that it sort of is birthed from Judaism, which means that Judaism has to be intact, because
it's
when the
not
world
separable from it. That's
remakes
right.
itself again,
Yeah.
we have to move through that again, and then it moves on. And there's different responsibilities for different peoples.
And that
Wow, there's a lot of good in what he said there. I like he even said Judaism, and not just the Jewish people, but Judaism, which is true. Judaism does need to be intact. The idea of the rebirth of Western civilization, first of all, I think I hear this a lot now, that Judeo-Christian values. Calvin Robinson mentioned it in his video, and I didn't comment on it because it was sort of just, he said it in passing. Christian values built the West. Bacchanalian orgies are also Western civilization. There's a lot going on. A lot of stuff has been produced by Western civilization, and it's not all Judeo-Christian values. Karl Marx was part of Western civilization. You know what I mean? Like all of this, it's all Western civilization. So to speak prescriptively about Western civilization, saying that it's built on Judeo-Christian values when that's not completely the case, and to say that it is, or that it was and will be again, or that it should be, I think is to sort of tacitly advocate for this massive cultural shift. It sounds a little bit, he may be flirting with Christian nationalism a little bit here. Maybe I'm oversensitive to that topic, but when you try to overhaul society, that's when the monsters come out. You got to be careful. You got to be careful about grand projects to overhaul society and get rid of the undesirables. You just got to be careful. Just be careful. Make disciples. Jesus gave us the task to make disciples. He didn't say take over the world. He said make disciples. Hopefully we make enough disciples that everyone's a disciple. But until then, let's make disciples.
It's a debate the early church has. I mean, halfway through the 2nd century, we've talked about Marcion, this kind of heretical figure who emerges and tries to repudiate the Jewish inheritance, get rid of the Old Testament canon. It's very clear. There's sort of a universal consensus around the Mediterranean world among the early Christian communities that would shatter the faith. That the seeds of Christianity are Jewish seeds, and you
Correct.
can't get rid of them without erasing Christianity itself.
Correct.
I think it's part of why anti-Semitism, or as Dennis says, Jew hate, which is more specific, flares up at moments of undoing.
I think we should start calling it Jew hate. Nazis came up with the term anti-Semitism to make it sound like it wasn't just Jew hate. Maybe we should just start saying Jew hate again, because that's what it is.
Because you undo the point of creation, right? You undo the base first. And that's part of why in our reestablishment of a kind of order that makes sense and is oriented towards the transcendent, it starts there again. But it's a very important point of destruction. It's like destroy, as Prager said very artfully when we're talking about Exodus, it's the law wrapped in the sacred. It's not just the law. Mm-hmm. And if you can destroy that, if you can destroy the thing that gives birth to Christianity, then you can't just rebirth Christianity.
Yeah. Well, and it certainly is the case that
the whole idea of rebirth and reshaping society is an undertone to this conversation, notwithstanding they're totally right about Marcion. They're totally right that there's no Christianity without Judaism. I think, you could interpret what they're saying here in a few different ways, but it really sounds like they're saying not just Judaism, Second Temple Judaism as the birth, the seed plot for Christianity, so to speak, but that Judaism today, there's present tense, needs to continue to be Judaism and Jewish people, and Jewish identity, and that matters. And in that, I'm in 100% agreement. It's very refreshing to hear them say that. It's good. It's correct.
I think Christian thinkers have actually written that anti-Semitism is ultimately anti-Christianity.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's just the beginning of the end.
Wow. Well, there's a lot going on there. I think there's going to be things I disagree with these folks on. I think we probably disagree with each other on things. But I liked a lot of the things I heard. I think there's some potential there that people are starting to grasp the truth that yes, Jewish identity matters, Israel matters. There is no Christianity without Judaism. Christianity needs the Jewish people. Christianity needs the Jewish people. Present tense. And I like that they got there after sort of saying at the beginning, well, it's mysterious, so we're not sure. They did settle on this really firm statement. That Christianity needs Judaism and needs the Jewish people. And in that, we're in total agreement. So they really ended on a high note there. I appreciate that. Well, if you'd like to know more about our perspective, a Messianic Jewish perspective, which is more Israel-centric than this, check out FFOZ.org. We have lots and lots of resources there for you to learn more about Messianic Judaism, reading the Bible from a Messianic Jewish perspective, explaining all these Bible verses you may be struggling with, and really just refreshing. It's been so refreshing for me, this perspective, getting to know my Messiah again as a Jewish rabbi from Nazareth. Thanks for watching.